guide and that they're properly managed and accessible to persons in the event we get to that point. We also believe NADMA needs to be strengthened. I think there's some personal issues that has to be addressed within NADMA, and that's one of the things I'm committed to doing. Minister Andel is our Minister for Foreign Affairs, Trade and Export Development. We have aligned trade and export development to foreign affairs because we recognize it's absolutely critical for economic development to ensure that Grenada begins to export a lot more. And that is tied into our desire to drive production capacity. And to that extent, we've created what I call the Super Ministry, which is the Ministry of Economic Development, Planning, Tourism, ICT, the Creative Economy, Agriculture, Lands, and Fisheries. I know it's a mouthful, but Minister Andrews is a experienced former public servant. I guess he's returned to public service by taking on this role. But we've lumped all of these areas together because we recognize that is essentially the productive engine of Grenada, and we want to give it special attention. Particularly, you may ask, why is ICT and the creative economy with agriculture? And the reason is we feel strongly that agriculture needs to be managed with the use of technology to make sure that we can create a modern agriculture society to drive production within agriculture. Minister Cornwall, Dennis Cornwall, is responsible for infrastructure, physical development, public utilities, civil aviation, and transportation. Essentially, this is the infrastructure network of Grenada, and we want to ensure that the synergies that exist in that ministry redound to the benefit of Grenada. No doubt our road network, for example, needs serious attention. It's one of the things that we need to address. Transportation is another issue that we need to address, and so it's important that we think they remain together. Honorable Tevin Andrews is the Minister for Caricom and PT Martinique Affairs and Local Government. That's probably self-explanatory. He's championed the cause of PT Martinique and Caricom throughout his political life. Honorable Philip Telesford is the Minister for Social and Community Development, Housing and Gender Affairs. Housing is going to be a major part of our transformation agenda. We intend to pay special attention to the Housing Authority of Grenada and to ensure that we use that statutory body for what we think it was intended, which is to really drive the redevelopment of housing, particularly affordable and accessible housing to our citizens. Minister Telesford is going to be supported in that ministry by Senator the Honorable Gloria Ann Thomas, who's going to have special responsibility for social development, gender affairs within the ministry. Senator Thomas has been a lifelong public servant and an advocate for social issues, in particular the less fortunate. And so we think she will bring her passion and her expertise to assist in that area. Honorable Karine James is the Minister for Climate Resilience, Environment and Renewable Energy. Climate resilience, the environment and renewable energy has taken on, as I think most of us are aware, significant importance worldwide. The issue of preservation of the environment, the issue of climate change, the issue of rising temperatures globally is something that we have to grapple with. And we recognize that given the vulnerability of Grenada and our past in championing the development of small island states, and particularly ensuring that we get funding for climate mitigation, climate adaptation, that is one area that we intend to refocus on. We know that there's significant grant funding available in those areas, and we really want to reposition Grenada as a leading champion of climate resilience, climate mitigation, climate adaptation. And so we feel the Honorable Ms. James will bring the youthful energy, enthusiasm, and passion for an issue that I think is perhaps more important to the younger generation than the older generation, since they're the ones who are going to be left inheriting the earth. And having to deal with the impacts of climate change if we don't address it. So we certainly expect to champion that cause and to put Grenada again on the map in relation to that issue. The Honorable Ron Livingston Redhead is going to be a Minister of State with responsibility for youth, sports, and culture within the Ministry of Education, Youth, Sports, and Culture. My colleague on my left is going to be the Senior Minister in the Ministry of Education, Youth, Sports, and Culture, the Honorable Senator David Andrew. David, as most of you may know, is a lifelong educator, and I think perhaps of all of the ministers, this is a case of a match made in heaven, glove in hand, in terms of his experience and his expertise and his passion for education. So I think we're quite fortunate to have him as our Minister of Education. The Honorable Adrian Augustine Thomas will be our Minister for State with responsibility for agriculture, lands, and fisheries in the Super Ministry. we have indicated that food security and agriculture are our priorities, and therefore we felt it important to have a minister dedicated to addressing that issue. Before coming to this meeting, I met a citizen who spent about 45 minutes talking about his passion for agriculture and the things we need to do, particularly bringing ICT to agriculture. He even brought with him a device, which if the device does the things he's saying, it reinforces our commitment that within Grenada we have talented Grenadians who can really help revolutionize our agriculture sector. So I'm encouraged and happy that I think we will find the talent within Grenada that can really help us transform our agriculture sector and put it back to where it once was. Senator the Honorable Gayton, and I'm saying his full name, Gayton Jonathan Lacrette, is the Minister for Health, Wellness, and Religious Affairs. And I don't think it's any understatement that our health and the Ministry of Health needs a lot of attention, a lot of work. Our overall health and the situation of the health sector in Grenada has to be addressed. And so we are happy that Senator Lacrette has taken up this challenge. I think we are going to have to provide as much support as we can. We are going to have to involve as many sectors of our society and in the diaspora as we can to ensure that we can turn around the fortunes of our health sector in Grenada. So I think his energy, his passion is well suited for this ministry, and we look forward to working with him to ensure that we can improve the state of healthcare in Grenada. I believe that covers all of the ministers and the respective ministries. As a result of the realignment of the ministries, obviously we would have had to also realign and transfer our permanent secretaries. That task would have been accomplished yesterday with approval by the cabinet. And so we would find that most of the permanent secretaries are, in a sense, reporting, put it afresh today at their respective ministries. In the last week or so, many of the ministers have been meeting their staff, familiarizing themselves with the ministries, with the personnel there, introducing themselves, hearing from them. We expect that transition will continue over the next several days, but our ministers are ready to go to work. We believe our permanent secretaries are also fired up and ready to go to work, and so we look forward to working with all of our personnel at the respective ministries to begin the transformation process that we campaigned on. So that in a nutshell is the wrap-up on the report of the alignment of the ministries as well as the ministerial portfolios. I will now jump to the major issue of pensions. We met with the unions as well as the Police Welfare Association and Prison Welfare Association, the other two group of individuals affected by the ruling of Justice Ralston Glasgow, which essentially indicated that the Pension Disqualification Act was unconstitutional, and therefore the public servants, including the police and prison officers, were entitled to their pension payments in accordance with the respective pieces of legislation that govern the payment of pensions for them. The meeting was cordial, perhaps even friendly. It was well attended. I think we had, give or take, 20 to 30 persons representing the various unions in attendance. The meeting took place last Friday at the Cabinet Room. The purpose of the meeting was twofold. One, to provide a fiscal overview of the impact of the payment of the pension on the state of the government's finances. That presentation was done by the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Sylvester, who's here with us. We undertook to provide that presentation to the unions. Mike, have we gone ahead and done so already? Yes. Right, and so we've in fact forwarded that information to the unions. We have indicated to the unions that we are prepared to give them until the 31st of July to come back to us with any questions or comments they may have on the presentation. And so we expect and look forward to receiving from them any comments or queries or questions they may have. We also made it clear to the unions that we were not here to fight, argue, or attempt to bargain away the right of the workers to the pension, given the court ruling, and that our commitment to pay the pension remained firm. To that extent, we indicated that our preferred approach would be to address the retroactive aspect of the pension payments first. Our data indicates that the retroactive payment is roughly around $60 million. We indicated to the unions that we would like to do one of two things by the 30th of November, either pay that $60 million in its entirety or do a part payment with a proposal for the payment over a period of time. we, at that meeting, was not seeking the approval or agreement of the unions, but we simply wanted to inform them of the approach we want to take. We also reiterated our commitment that those workers who currently fall and who retire or fall upon retirement, that their retirement pensions will in fact be honored. So those two messages were sent clearly to the trade unions. I think it was well received. We indicated to them that we were happy for them to share the extent of our discussions with their members. So in terms of next steps, we await hearing back from the unions with any questions or comments that they may have. Hopefully that can be done by the 31st of July. We will then respond with our proposal as to whether we're in a position to pay the entire 60 million by the 30th of November, or whether we would have to enter into a part payment schedule. So that in a nutshell was the extent of the conversation. Other issues were raised by the unions in terms of the general treatment of public workers over the years, the fact that many of them may be disgruntled or disappointed or despondent over the fact that they have, to some extent, in their view, been disrespected, perhaps by several administrations over an extended period of time, and the pension issue just being another extension of that. I indicated to them that our approach is to be reconciliatory, that we were happy to apologize for any wrongs of our predecessors in office, that we value our workers, we're on the same team, and therefore, hence the reason for being upfront, hence the reason for swiftly. In fact, we met with the unions before having our first official cabinet meeting. So I think that's testimony to the swiftness with which we wish to address this issue. So all in all, we expect that we should be in a position to build a conciliatory relationship with the trade unions and our public sector workers, and I don't just mean that in terms of central workers, but police officers, teachers, etc. So we look forward to continuing the dialogue with the trade unions, and we expect certainly perhaps by the month of August or September that we will be able to communicate further to the public a definitive position as it relates to certainly the retroactive aspect of the pension payments. That, in a nutshell, is the extent of my presentation this morning. I will hand over to the Minister of Education, who will speak on the issue of the return of the dock salaries to public workers and the teachers, as well as the issue of school fees for the forthcoming school term.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister, colleague Minister, and Permanent Secretary, members of the press, and everyone following this briefing. The pleasure is mine to bring good news. The Ministry of Education and indeed the government is pleased to announce the repayment of the docked salaries. And in keeping with the spirit of what the Prime Minister indicated, we believe it's not going to be productive to have an adversarial climate with our employees, with our workers. And we know that this docked salaries, the docked salaries created a very adversarial atmosphere within our ministry and the education sector for a pretty long time, and no doubt that had cost us quite a bit. So we are happy to announce that this month end, the docked salaries to the tune of $1,264,075.78 will be paid to persons who were unduly docked their salaries. That refund, we are advised, will be processed one day after the regular processing of payments. So normally salaries are processed on the 21st of July each month. And so this month, July 22nd, would be an additional processing of the docked salaries. We have been reliably informed from our dedicated staff at Finance that this is happening. And so both payrolls would be sent to the respective financial institutions for disbursement by the 26th. So it's our anticipation by the 28th or so of this month, those funds, the docked salaries, will be available to persons in their various accounts, right? So two separate listings will be sent to financial institutions, the routine salaries as processed on the 21st, and a second payroll to take care of the docked salaries that will take place on the 22nd of July. So good news for all teachers, and we are very happy to do that, and we look forward to continuing to collaborate amicably with all of our teachers and stakeholders in education to ensure all of the goodwill and the relational spirit that existed in that sector can be regained, and we can benefit immensely from that. So that's it for the docked salaries, and we are very happy to announce that. In terms of the school fees, many of you would be aware that it was declared education would be free. And now let me say that this has to be a work in progress, because even if we've just gotten in, and while the commitment is there to making it entirely free, we need to give ourselves appropriate time to do an assessment of the impact as we go. It's not possible to do everything all at the same time, so we'd have to take it incrementally. But rest assured, in preparation for the September school term, we've already moved in the direction of ensuring that secondary and primary and pre-primary school students would have no fees to pay. So the routine fees, students will no longer have to pay. Let me point out, though, that there are some fees that are associated with the purchase of particular items like school ties, crested shirts, where schools have a particular format in which they do things, and it's particularly sourced. And so those items, we anticipate that parents and caregivers would have to fund, because the schools have a particular way it's done, and it comes at a particular cost. We are, however, continuing discussion with principals. It's an ongoing process. We have already engaged them, and we are aware that there are kinks and nuances in each school that we would have to work with. Let me point out that some schools have been in the practice of aggregating fees, and that aggregated fee structure is passed on to students, and they take care of several different things. So we are working with them to understand those nuances. The bottom line is, though, this administration wants to make free access of education available to all students, primary, secondary, pre-primary, and we want to make sure that no school is put or left in a worse off position than they were prior to this policy position. So we are currently engaging principals, and rest assured, all of the kinks that are there, we are going to diligently iron all of them out to ensure that we leave no school in a worse off position than they were before. We anticipate that several persons might be asking about TAMCC and fees. And yes, we are committed to having that happen too. But we, in fairness to the administration, we want to take the time to assess the impact. We want to take the time to assess the financial fallouts of that, and to be able to more appropriately rule. So we would advise that we proceed as per usual with the TAMCC payments and fees, as much as we would like to say right now, let's do TAMCC as well, but those things come with financial implications, and we want to be prudent in how we proceed. So we'll proceed with TAMCC as per usual for this year, but I assure you, by the next school year, and I don't mean September 2022, the following school year, if I should say it that way, we will have updated news. In fact, and long before that, but we'll be in a position to plan, to prepare, to cater for the impact, and to be able to appropriately bring that same free education policy to TAMCC. So just in case persons might be wondering. So by and large, we commit to free education, and we are already taking steps to ensure that come September, no student will be denied access because they can't, or would have difficulty going to school because their parents feel they couldn't amass whatever the fee was. And so we are going to continue to discuss and work with our school fraternity, the Principals Association, and all the schools to ensure that we don't put any school in a worse off position than they were prior to this policy position. And basically, I think that's what it is in relation to fees and the docked salaries being repaid. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. The Honorable Joseph Andel, Minister of Foreign Affairs, will report on our attendance at the 49th Caricom Heads of Conference meeting.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister Mitchell, colleague, Honorable David Andrew, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance, Mr. Mike Sylvester, members of the media, good morning, welcome. I now present to you a brief report on the attendance of Prime Minister and I at the 49th Caricom Heads of Government and Foreign Ministers Conference held in Paramaribo, Suriname between July 3rd and 5th. The summit was attended by nearly all of the leaders of Caricom, barring Honorable Andrew Holness of Jamaica, Honorable Roosevelt Skerritt of the Commonwealth of Dominica, who attended virtually, and Prime Minister Harris, Timothy Harris of St. Kitts and Nevis, who was engaged in domestic matters. We thought that the meeting was a good one from a Caricom perspective. Obviously, it was the first engagement that Prime Minister Mitchell and I had at that level. In fact, in my case, it was my very first engagement as Minister of Foreign Affairs, even before I had set foot in my office. Baptism of fire, if you may call it that, but friendly fire though. Yes. So the Prime Minister was very warmly welcomed and greeted by all of his colleagues. Everyone was happy to hear of the peaceful transfer of power in Grenada and commended Grenada for handling its elections in a manner that allowed for a smooth transition from a party that had won 2 consecutive clean sweeps to one that had been in the doldrums up to literally just a few months before. They were all impressed by that accomplishment. Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell was assigned responsibility for ICT and youth in the quasi-cabinet of Caricom. These are not really formal positions, but to ensure that the integration process goes on smoothly and that every sector is represented and taken care of. These assignments are allocated to different prime ministers from time to time. Some of the more pertinent matters that were discussed at the summit were transportation, or maybe the lack of transportation within the Caricom region. Air travel has become a nightmare, particularly with the demise of Liat and the scaling back of services by Caribbean Airlines. So all of the heads, in fact, all delegations recognized the need for urgent action to be taken to alleviate the problem caused by the lack of airlift among our islands. The question of a fast ferry service again came to the fore, and there is a proposal that that ferry be initiated. No fixed timeline was given, but loosely within the next 2 to 3 years, and that the initial participants would be Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada, and Barbados, with other islands and territories to be added as time goes on. The ferry that is envisaged is a roll-on, roll-off. That is one that would enable people to get onto their vehicles, get it onto the ferry, and move from island to island so that when you land, you are mobile still. Food security, again, that was a major topic, and Guyana has, through President Irfan Ali, has undertaken the task and the challenge of becoming the breadbasket of the Caribbean. So all of the leaders have pledged to work towards achieving food and nutrition security for our respective populations in the Caricom region. Climate change also took up a good part of the discussion. Being in the main small island developing states, we are particularly vulnerable to hurricanes and other natural phenomena that in some cases can wipe out an entire economy within a matter of minutes. So the question of mitigation, the question of access to international financing, particularly in light of the designation of most Caricom countries as middle and high income countries, something which tends to create barriers in terms of our being able to access concessionary financing and grants. So this occupied a major part of the agenda. At the bilateral level, we were able to hold informal conversations with different countries, different delegations, and so on. Chief among those, I had a very fruitful meeting with the Chilean ambassador, Ambassador Juan Pino, who is the Chilean ambassador to Guyana. In that meeting, we were able to discuss a number of matters of mutual interest, including cooperation in agriculture, transferring technology. We examined the possibility of Chile providing assistance in terms of small farm machinery, assisting with new modern agricultural techniques and technology. We had a discussion on the possibility of assistance in the area of greenhouse farming. Also, the possibility of cooperation in the poultry industry. Chile is very big on animal husbandry and poultry production. And so we agreed to look into the possibility of some form of joint venture between local Grenadian poultry producers and some Chilean private entity or entities. We also discussed the revival of training opportunities for Grenadian teachers of Spanish to undergo short-term training courses at Chilean educational institutions. And in addition to that, the possibility of initiating student exchange programs whereby Chilean students at the secondary level can come to Grenada to do 1 year of their secondary education, and Grenadian students have reciprocal opportunities at Chilean secondary institutions. To that end, the Chilean ambassador, who is assigned to Grenada but resident in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, has proposed a visit to Grenada, which we hope to facilitate soon so that we can take concrete steps towards the realization of, or towards the concretization of those items that we discussed in the bilateral. We were also able to hold dialogue with the Venezuela Vice Minister for Caricom Affairs regarding the possibility of reviving the Petro-Caribe agreement. And I must add that this is not only in relation to Grenada, but in relation to the wider Caribbean in terms of the other countries who previously participated in the Petro-Caribe arrangement. So all in all, we believe it was a very fruitful, a very beneficial trip for Grenada, and we look forward to following up on those engagements with a view towards bringing more benefits to our people and our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mr. Andel. So I think, it's been, give or take, 3 weeks on the job in my case. In my minister's case, probably 14 days. We thus far are quite happy with our experience. Obviously, as new ministers, we have to learn the public service. We have to learn, I don't want to say the bureaucracy, but we do have to learn the bureaucracy and ensure that administratively we are able to function and function effectively. I have, in meetings, the various meetings with the personnel at the respective ministries, emphasize our commitment to addressing staffing issues, to addressing conditions of work issues. I want to ask our personnel to be patient. No doubt it is a complex situation and we would need time to sort it all out, but we are committed to doing so because we recognize it's important to take care of our staff, take care of our personnel, if we are going to be on the same page and really drive the transformation agenda home. So that commitment is there. And to some extent, the fact that we've chosen to address issues like the dock salaries with the teachers and public workers, like the pension, is a signal of our commitment to address some of the big ticket items as early as we can, so that we can also, over time, address some of the smaller issues that impacts our workers. So certainly I look forward to leading in that aspect. As the Minister responsible for public administration, I'm quite aware of the obligations that are placed on me to ensure that I lead by example. So we certainly want to assure all of our workers and the public that this government is committed to good governance. We are committed to, as quickly as we can, making the decisions so that all of us can get on with our lives. And you can therefore expect that perhaps the same swiftness with which we came to governance is the same swiftness with which we will govern. And so I certainly look forward to taking any questions or comments that members of the media who are here may present. I'm being reminded, I'm being reminded by my colleague that I should perhaps say a word on cricket. Oh, you want to say a word on cricket? All right. Minister Andal wants to say a word on cricket, so I'll give way to him.
Yes, I must also add that I had the distinct pleasure of meeting with and conversing with former West Indies cricket captain and international great Sir Vivian Richards, who has given his commitment to work with us for the re-establishment of primary school cricket, initially in St. Patrick and then eventually throughout Grenada. So there will be further engagements with Sir Viv so that we can get that off and running. Thank you.
Well, now that you've raised cricket, I probably don't have a choice but to chat a little bit on that. As you may be aware, Sir Viv was in fact awarded the Caricom highest order at the Caricom Heads of Conference meeting. I think we all know Sir Viv is a legend both on and off the field, and his contribution towards Caribbean cricket, but also our sense of identity and pride and confidence in the world. He has left an indelible mark, and so I was honored to meet him in that capacity as well. As luck will have it, I had a courtesy call from Dr. Shallow, who is the Vice President of Cricket West Indies, as well as our own Mr. Gill, who is also the Vice President of Windward Islands Cricket yesterday. And we talked about this very issue, the need to re-establish grassroots and primary school cricket. Some of you may not be aware, but in fact there are about 15 cricketers in Grenada from the region, 4 of whom are Grenadians, who are actually on contract and who are paid anywhere between $1,500 to $2,700 US per month. And to some extent all they're doing at this stage is practicing. But it shows that you can in fact have a career in sport and earn perhaps better money than even working in the public service. And so our commitment to sport and to re-establishing grassroots sports, whether it's football or cricket, is something that we take seriously. The Minister for Youth and Sport, Honorable Ron Reddard, attended that meeting. We also had a courtesy call from the new president of the Grenada Football Association, Marlon Glean, as well as our own Jason Roberts, who is an executive with CONCACAF. And we also talked about the need to ensure that grassroots football and primary school football is played. So there are a number of things that we intend to do to support that. The president of GFA, for instance, raised the need to correct some of the lighting at some of the grounds because the lighting is not adequate. In some instances, they're just not high enough to give the kind of lighting that is required. Cuthbert Peters Park, for example, is one of those. We also recognize that, particularly when it comes to primary school events, that if you have them at 1 or 2 in a day, nobody's watching the kids because everybody's at work, and therefore they don't feel encouraged. That sense of village or community or even school rivalries is lacking. So some of the things, Honorable Minister for Education, that I'm sure the Minister of Sport will be coming to you with, is the need to make sure that our sporting events are held at times that allows the community, the villages, the parents, the siblings, the friends to come and support and view the matches. So those are some of the things we want to address. But certainly from a sport perspective, we are committed to ensuring that sport is not just a pastime and an amateur fun event, but an actual career that gives our young people an opportunity to earn a livelihood and to become outstanding. So thank you for the intervention. So as I was saying, I'm happy to entertain any questions that members of the media who are present may have.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. Thank you, ministers. Colleagues, good morning. Are you ready with your questions? GBN, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask my questions. Good morning to members of the head table. I'm Chrislina. I represent the Grenada Broadcasting Network. Welcome, ministers and Prime Minister. It's your first official engagement with members of the media. I have a few questions. I hope I really get the opportunity to have them answered if you so can. And I'll first pose a few questions to the Prime Minister, Minister Mitchell. I would like you to explain for us, please, sir, what are government's plan in addressing people who are owed by the state for judgment handed down by the court? My next question, how much money is government owing citizens for judgment handed down by the court, excluding the pension and gratuity payments that ought to be made? For the Minister for Education, around this time of the year, Mr. Andrew, a lot of parents, sit back and they wait for assistance from the government, those who are less fortunate, those who cannot afford it, for the vouchers that government normally would give out to people to help in assisting them with uniform and some of the basic items for the students to go to school. Will that be something that people can still look forward to from this administration? Thank you so much. I have other questions, but I'll allow for these to be answered if you can. Much appreciated.
All right, thank you very much for the questions. I don't know the figure of judgments that are owed by the state of Grenada to citizens, excluding the pension figure. The PS in the Ministry of Finance is there. I don't know whether he readily has that information available. If he does, I'm sure he'd be able to tell us. Well, if the government is taken to court and if the government loses its case and if there's an order that money should be paid to our citizens, then I expect the government will honor it. And as a government that lead, that's what we intend to do as well. Based on my briefings, I did not get the sense that there was any chronic non-payment of judgments. Judgments oftentimes are either paid by periodic payments over a period of time with installment payments. I'm sure in any individual case, if someone is affected, that their attorneys will certainly be pursuing the government for payment. So the simple commitment is that if you're owed, we expect our government to be honoring the debt. But I can't give you a figure as to what is currently owed. I don't know, Mike, if you have that at your fingertips and you want to address it.
Yeah, thank you, Prime Minister, and good morning to all. The figure started around 40 million some years ago, and that, of course, is included as part of our debt stock. So, as part of the debt stock, the 2.1 billion figure that we have, the claims compensation and judgment debts, as we call them, is part of that. There has been an active effort to reduce that over time. So I can't say at this particular time what the exact figure is, but it started around $40 million some years ago, and we have been making efforts to reduce that over time. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Mike. But I should say, I mean, a government is, in a sense, a living, breathing thing, and from time to time, you'd always find that there are disputes. And so it is something that is ongoing. You'll never get to a point where the government doesn't owe anyone or there are no judgments outstanding. But as I said, our commitment would be to pay as quickly as we can any judgments that are owed by the state. In relation to the third question regarding the vouchers that are provided for students, upon my assumption of office, I've been briefed that this special projects or special needs project has actually been run out of the Prime Minister's office and not out of the Minister of Education or the Ministry of Education. So issues that we are looking to regularize because to a large extent it's addressing issues of students who need uniforms or students who are unable to afford fees or students who need school meals, etc. Certainly our preliminary assessment is this is best handled via the Ministry of Education and via the principals rather than, frankly, the Prime Minister's office. So it is likely that we will return this to the Ministry of Education. It is likely that we will ensure that the principals, the Parent Teachers Association, and the communities who are best able to advise us to the persons who really are in need, that ministry takes care of that. But the commitment is there, yes, to continue assisting as we can in terms of providing uniform allowances and any other special needs that students may need. As you are aware, we've indicated that our long-term goal ultimately is to make education in Grenada free. And so if there are students who simply cannot afford the basic things that are associated with coming to school, certainly as a government, we have an obligation to assist, so we will continue to do so. But to be clear, we do not think this has to be run out of the Prime Minister's office. That office has enough work to do, and certainly it's an issue, I think, that is more fitting for the Ministry of Education. So I hope I've answered the three questions.
Thank you, sir. Linda Straker, good morning.
Good morning to you, Les, and the panel. I have a number of questions, and I hope that they too can be answered. I am going to start with the first one, with what the Prime Minister just referred to, with the assistance for students. With the decision to now transfer this program to the Ministry of Education, what can parents look forward to? School is presently in holiday and school will be open in the next couple of weeks. Would they be getting that assistance this year? My other question has to do with the pension and gratuity payment. Yesterday, I think quite a bit of people became quite confused of hearing one figure that was presented by the immediate former Prime Minister and the union giving one figure of 60 million. The Minister for Education this morning reiterated that it's 60 million, you iterated that is retroactive. My question around that is, can you tell us which, under which appropriation or which vote that money will be coming to pay? Because you said that it would be paid sometime in November. So which appropriation? And with regard to the doc salaries, under which appropriation vote is that money coming from to pay the teachers? With regard to in 2013, a series of new financial legislation was put into place that puts the government in some cases a cap as to some things that they can do in terms of salary and how much money must be saved from the budget and so. Do you think that any sections of those laws going to be repealed or going to repeal some of these laws in total? I'm going to ask these three for now. I do have others.
All right, thank you. I hope I can answer all of the questions. I think for future purposes, it would be if we ask one question and give us the opportunity to respond, and then you ask the other question. It might be a task just trying to remember the questions. So the first question is, the answer is yes. I thought I made it clear that we are committed to paying. The fact that we are working on a transfer of the program out of the Prime Minister's office to the Ministry of Education will not impact the assistance being provided. So the answer is yes, the assistance will continue to be provided. That's the first question.
Where the money for the teachers for both the
right.
payment
So
of salaries and gratuity?
Right. So I think the question is asking which appropriation vote it's going to be coming from. I'm not going to give you a specific appropriation vote, but I can certainly say to you, based on my briefing from the officials at the Ministry of Finance, that we are able to pay both the doc salaries and the retroactive aspect of the pension from the government's cash flow. So we certainly have the ability to pay those without having to borrow. As you're aware, there would not have been, prior to us assuming office, a specific appropriation or vote to pay the doc salaries or to pay the pension. But part of the managing of the finances, if those adjustments have to be made, then I'm satisfied that Mike and his team at the Ministry of Finance will address that. I don't know if Mike wants to speak specifically on it.
Okay. Thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you for the question, Linda. So basically, with respect to the doc salaries would be paid under the votes that would be affected. So teachers, Ministry of Education, for example, it will be paid there. The other public officers, wherever those persons fall, the doc salaries would be paid there. Now, the amount, as was mentioned by the minister, is just $1.2 million. So that could be found within the existing appropriation. You will recall that when the budget was passed, the budget was of $1.2 million thereabout. So within that context, you would be able to find that $1.2 million, I'm sure, from savings within the budget. Now, with respect to the pension, if we are talking about $60 million, it means that either the government has to find that from within the existing allocation that I mentioned, or by way of supplementary estimates. And usually the law allows for 2 supplementary estimates per year, where you go to Parliament and you ask for additional appropriation to be able to actually get the allocation appropriation to pay that. And as the Prime Minister has just said, once that is done, then of course you can pay that from cash within the consolidated fund.
All right, so I think the question is referring to the Fiscal Responsibility Act, right? The Fiscal Responsibility Act has been or was suspended by the prior administration given the COVID-19 pandemic. The suspension still remains in place. We are reviewing, or we will be reviewing the Fiscal Responsibility Act to assess whether or not there is a need to make any changes. So I can't say for sure that changes will be made. Ultimately, I think the Fiscal Responsibility Act is a good act for the government. It ensures that the government manages its finances in a fiscally responsible manner. And so I certainly support the legislation. How long the pandemic lasts, how long the impact of the pandemic lasts has to be assessed as we go along to see whether or not we continue triggering the suspension or whether we get back to a state of normalcy in terms of that act being in place. But that requires time, that requires us to assess the fiscal situation of the government as we go forward.
Thank you, Linda. Nancy Maguire, good morning.
What the Prime Minister just spoke about.
Nancy, good morning. Are you there?
Good morning.
ahead.
And good morning to the panel. Are you hearing me all right?
Yes, we are. Go right ahead.
Okay. Congratulations, Mr. Prime Minister, firstly, and to all your colleagues. One of the first messages that you issued was a call for people to come forward and volunteer their services on the boards of directors of statutory bodies and other agencies. And I'm wondering how that is coming along, the response of that, and if you've made any changes at any of these statutory bodies. And the second thing you had mentioned, well, when you spoke at Caricom, was food security is a priority. And I'm wondering how you're going to proceed with addressing the technology side of it with the production side of it and connecting that to, climate change, agricultural practices, which are funded a lot by some of these statutory bodies. But I'd like you to address those two issues. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Nancy, for the questions. So in relation to the call for persons to serve and volunteer, the response actually has been very favorable. Several Grenadians, both in and outside of Grenada, have been offering themselves to serve. So what we've agreed to do is we need to obviously manage that process. We have created a Ministry of Mobilization, Implementation and Transformation. And so what we will be doing is having a dedicated email address announced to the public so that members of the public can send their expressions of interest, their resume, their CV, their biographies to that address. We will have staff that will receive these expressions of interest that will respond to them, and together with the respective line ministers who are responsible ultimately for overseeing the respective statutory bodies, we expect to give opportunities for those who've expressed a willingness to serve on the respective boards. We obviously, the boards have a finite number. We also have to ensure that people who express an interest to serve have the capacity to properly serve, because as a director, there are duties, fiduciary duties, responsibilities, etc. that comes with it. Part of what we also want to do is to give an opportunity to allow Grenadians to actually be trained as it relates to what it means to be a director or to become an accredited directorship. So we envisage as we go along that we will ask for a commitment from persons who are given the opportunity to serve, that they agree to engage in training or engage in certification that would allow them to become accredited and certified directors, which will enhance their own individual skills as well as their certification and allow them to do their job. So it is certainly going to be a process. But I feel quite confident based on the reaction and the responses that we've had thus far that it will truly open up the statutory bodies for what I would call average Green agents to serve. The other things we want to achieve as well on the boards, we want to have an age spread that allows for younger and older persons to serve, so that as older persons retire, we can be assured that we have a next generation of Green agents who can serve. We also want to ensure that women in particular are given the opportunity to serve on a lot of these boards. Women make up 50, if not more, percent of our population, and we want to make sure that our institutions are reflective of that fact. So those are some of the goals we want to achieve by opening up the statutory bodies to the public for service. In the immediate interim, obviously, we don't want the business of these entities to slow down or to be affected. So to some extent, there may be what I call transient or temporary staffing at the board level to ensure that there is continuity while we meet the medium to longer term goals. In relation to agriculture, ICT, and climate change, all three are linked together. We live in a region where we are susceptible to hurricanes 6 months of the year, and these hurricanes have the potential always, they're existential threats. And the connection with the climate, the warm and increase in global temperatures directly impact on the ferocity and the frequency of the hurricanes. So rarely there's a direct, if ever there's a group of islands in the world, I think the OECS and by extension the Caribbean are at the forefront of the negative consequences of global warming and climate change. And things like hurricanes obviously impact our food security tremendously. So what we are really aiming at is particularly to incentivize younger persons to get involved in agriculture, is to be able to have the sort of research and the application of technology that is necessary to ensure that our younger persons in particular take part in agriculture, take part in food production, take part in agro-processing. It is going to be a complex task, we don't doubt that, but we certainly think that if we leverage the technology, and I started off by pointing out that I had met with a young Grenadian who in fact had researched and done some work to develop an instrument which, if he says it can do what he says it can do, it allows him to track the history of a plant, the soil conditions, to be able to tell us what the plant needs to improve. It allows him to identify the type of nutmegs we need to grow that best suits our soil, etc. That is the kind of approach I think we need to take to our agriculture. Data is going to be critical, and I think if we're able to research, to have the data and then apply that to the technologies that we need for our agriculture, it will certainly help us with our food security. But crucially, there's a lot of grant funding that's available under the same issue of climate resilience, climate mitigation, climate adaptation. And I think it will be incumbent upon us to design and write programs and projects that we can then go out into the international finance market where the green money is available, so to speak, to be able to bring that home to benefit us and ensure that we have project financing for those issues. So it obviously will be a work in progress. It is early days, very early days in our administration, but we certainly intend to take this issue seriously. That is why we've created the Ministry of Climate Resilience, Environment and Renewable Energy, because we recognize that's one of the major issues that will face us on an existential basis. So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. MTV, good morning. MTV, good morning. Are you there? All right, so Johnson Richardson, we'll come to you now.
Okay, good morning, Prime Minister and Minister. Let me also welcome you guys officially to your position and so on. Let me also say, Minister of Foreign Affairs, I welcome the news relative to cricket. However, I was kind of disappointed that you did not say St. Patrick's and St. Mark's. We are neighbors. So if you were going to make an offer, I was really hoping that. Nevertheless, I embrace that opportunity and look forward to seeing primary school cricket return. Right. My question though is, just before the election, and I'm speaking to Minister of Education, the T.A. Marshall Community College lecturers and students were on the picket line for a number of reasons. You probably would be fully aware of those concerns that they had. to date, those concerns are still relevant, they are still real, and so on. And TAMCC, I don't know if your government have any issue, any plans to address those concerns, and how soon can we see those concerns being addressed. Secondly,
As I pointed out, one question, answer, then we go back
yes, yeah.
to respond.
Right, so thank you very much for the question. Indeed, we are aware that there are several challenges at the TAMCC, and I had become aware of them prior to this whole election process too. We are very committed to working through those issues. A number of reviews were done. In fact, those matters were already being discussed, and it's my understanding that a recently concluded research was done into the conditions at TAMCC by the author Lockjack out of Trinidad and Tobago, and that report is being reviewed to see what recommendations, because there are several areas of issues. In addition to that, I'm currently in discussion with our Minister for Legal Affairs, because there may be some legal issues in there too. So we are addressing that on several different fronts, and we are committed to resolving and ensuring that we come to an amicable resolve. But to tell you we have a solution right now, no, we don't, but the commitment is there, and we are already engaging the matters. It's probably just a matter of time before we reach out. In fact, I had made a call to the principal. I'm seeking to schedule a meeting with the chairman of the board so that we begin to engage and see exactly where things are and hear from them to get full perspective, but to deal with the challenges that exist at TAMCC, and we are going to deal with them in short order. Thank you.
Yes, I wish to assure you, Johnson, that at least Samaritan Presbyterian School is fully in the mix. That was the very first educational institution that I attended. And in fact, to get to one part of my constituency, Redmond, I have to seek your permission to pass through St. Mark to get there. So you're in the mix.
Welcome news indeed. Yeah, my second question has to do, Mr. Prime Minister, you said 3 weeks in office. To date, you have mentioned a number of initiatives that your government would have taken. One, the return of doc salaries, school fees, yes, of course, the pension. How would you respond to a person who said that a little bit premature and maybe biting too much at that stage, and the issue of sustainability might come into question moving forward?
That's an interesting question. I will answer it by saying I think the PS in the Ministry of Finance gave the figure for the doc salaries. It's $1.2 million. It's not a lot of money in the context of a $1.2 billion budget. And I think if you are talking about human beings, which is what our workers are, from where I sit, to have had our workers going through what they went through, particularly teachers who teach our students, over $1.2 million in the context of a $1.2 billion budget, frankly seems to me to be sending the wrong signal about what matters. So our education system, or teachers or students, a harmonious relationship, in my view, that is far more valuable. In fact, it is invaluable when you compare it with $1.2 million. So I don't think there's anything about biting off more than we can chew, or lack of sustainability over $1.2 million. I can assure you there are a lot more wastage that takes place within the government that totals far beyond the 1.2 million. You could just look at a lot of the things that are built and then have to be broken, and built again and then broken. In relation to the well, let me make this clear, because I want us to understand philosophically what we campaigned on. We campaigned on a process of transformation, and therefore we are not going to be doing the same things over and over and expect change. And I certainly didn't think we were elected not to make decisions. And 5 years may seem like a long time, but I can assure you it is not a long time in the life cycle of a politician. And so, given the implementation deficit that I think the public service suffers from, we intend to take decisions, and in fact, that to me is the sole job of a leader. People expect you to make decisions so that they can get on with their lives. If the decision is wrong, we'll find out and you get the opportunity to correct it. But the malaise of not making decisions, of overanalyzing, of several reports, of consultants, of back and forth, and then 4 years later nothing gets done is not an approach I'm going to take. So if it is we're biting off more than we can chew, then we can always spit it out and then take a smaller size and go again. So from where I sit, the issue of addressing the pensions is something we campaigned on, it's something we committed to do, and we need to get it over and move past that. Because really what we are dealing with here is a historical wrong that we need to get over and move on. If we get stuck talking about this issue, it means we are not moving forward. And I think you know what our slogan was. We are moving forward. So I don't think there's any question here of on sustainability. I think if let me make this clear. I trust the advice, the experience, the skill, and the competence of the citizens of Grenada who work at the Ministry of and I'm satisfied that they will give me competent advice. But at the end of the day, the decisions stop at this office. If the decision is wrong, then I'm the one who will face the heat, not them. So I can assure the public that I will not be putting, if I may use the word, the technocrats or the professionals in the Ministry of Finance, I will not be throwing them under the bus for any decision that we make at the policy level. So I don't think there's any fear at this stage of biting off more than we can chew or lack of sustainability on these simple issues, right? And let me give you context. The government spent $161 million, $163 million. I think it still owes $3 million to repurchase the shares in Greenlake. $163 million. The retroactive aspect of the pension is $60 million. That leaves us with a difference of $100 million. And if you ask the average citizen, what have we obtained as citizens of Grenada for the $161 million, I can tell you. Fuel prices are just as high. Electricity prices are just as high as when the company was not majority owned by the government. The reliability of electricity, I think, is being questioned. We know that a lot of the engines at the plant are significantly aged and needs to be addressed. There's been challenges with the profitability of the company already and the ability to pay dividends, etc. And I've heard workers talking about in the 25 years that the company was run by WRB, they never worried about getting paid. They're already concerned about the ability to get paid. So I'm saying when we are doing the analysis of what matters and context, no one asked whether spending $161 million was sustainable to buy back a company for which we are getting no immediate financial returns. So if you're asking me whether I would do this or put $60 million into the hands of Grenadians, I think the answer is obvious. I'd put the $60 million in the hands of Grenadians.
Thank you, sir. Any other question, Johnson, quickly?
Yes, that's one final question. The issue of I know the previous government was on the brink of starting that Western Main Road corridor. That was a serious one, a project that they had actually about to start. Yes. Continuity. What plans are in place? I know you mentioned the issue of road and so on, but how soon can we see that?
No, we intend to continue the project. Whatever bottlenecks that exist, we will remove them. I think, frankly, time is running out on the funding, and so we need to jumpstart the project as quickly as possible, which is why we created the Ministry of Implementation and Transformation, Mobilization, Implementation, and Transformation. So my understanding is that the Molineux aspect of the Western Corridor posed some challenges and some delays in terms of the project, the entire project being started. But we intend to address this. In fact, from an infrastructure point of view, resolving the situation in Molineux is imperative, and from where we sit is a national emergency. And therefore, we intend to address it from an infrastructure point of view as one of the first projects that we need to get going, almost like yesterday.
Thank you very much. See, we have a few colleagues with questions still. Kellon, Bob, Nisha, Paul, and Mikey Hutchinson. Kellon, we'll start with you. Good morning.
Good morning to the Honorable Prime Minister and his ministerial team there, and as well as the Permanent Secretary. And good morning to you, my colleague, Leslie Ann. So I have 3 questions, but of course, I would, as the Prime Minister instructed, ask 1 question at a time. Now, I understand that the head of the Grenada's Diaspora Affairs Office, that's Mr. Derek James, and this question is directed to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, was dismissed. Now, what would happen to that office, the Office of Diaspora Affairs? Now, that office was initially an NDC vision under the Tillman Thomas-led administration. And the purpose of the Diaspora Affairs Office was to be able to facilitate easier transactions between Grenadians in the diaspora and any kinds of business or philanthropic activity that they would need to engage in with Grenada at home. So Minister of Foreign Affairs, if you can indicate what would replace the Office of Diaspora Affairs, and has the entire office been disbanded?
Thank you, Dr. Bob. We have inherited a situation in foreign affairs where we have so many diplomats, alleged diplomats, trade counselors, honorary consuls, and all sorts of designations in a very murky situation. And so one of the first steps that we took was to recall all of our diplomatic personnel. Now, some of them will be recalled for consultation. Each one will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis in terms of value provided, in terms of funding, in terms of necessity, and so on, competence, all of that. And as I said, on a case-by-case basis, we will determine who will be retained if they so desire, and who will not be retained. We view the Diaspora Office as a very, very important link between Grenada and its sons and daughters who live abroad. And we have every intention of continuing and improving the work that has been done by that office. Regarding the termination of services, as far as I'm aware, there were some people at that office whose tenure had come to an end. They were all contractees, as far as I'm aware. And if your contract is over, it is over. We will take the necessary steps to restaff that office and all of our other diplomatic missions. I must say something, though, that it is customary that at any change of administrations, that there will be a review of diplomatic personnel and people of that nature. We have a situation in Grenada where virtually all of our diplomatic representatives are non-career civil servants. So we have a task on our hand to build a cadre of people from within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to reestablish Grenada in alignment with international norms and practices regarding the appointment of ambassadors and other diplomatic personnel. So we are committed to upgrading the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that aspect of the entire ministry, to giving opportunities for young Grenadians and maybe not so young Grenadians to upgrade themselves professionally, to follow their passion, and to give service to their country. We are also going to be guided by the Cheltenham Report, which recommended that certain practices be done away with regarding the appointment of ambassadors, trade counselors, consuls general, and so on. And I think that on a question of principle, if someone comes in as a political appointee by a particular administration, common sense and common decency should indicate that at the expiration of the term of the administration that appointed you, you should give the new administration an opportunity to start afresh. So that's what I'll say on these matters for the time being.
Thank you. Kellon, you have another question?
Yes, just two final questions. Well, this question is directed to the Minister of Finance and, of course, Mr. Mike Sylvester, who is here in his capacity as Permanent Secretary. Mr. Sylvester, I want to begin with you. You are charged with giving advice to the Minister of Finance with respect to projections for pensions payments. And so the question I have is, what accounted, or what would have accounted for the discrepancy between that 60 million projection that is now currently being bandied about versus the 400 million that the previous administration articulated by way of a national address by the Prime Minister based on advice given by the technocrats in the ministry. And so I think the question I have is, what formula, what methodology is being used to ensure that we can have a consistent price tag with respect to these pension payments? And either the Minister of Finance and Mr. Sylvester can answer the question, as Mr. Sylvester also worked with the previous administration on that score.
All right, Kellon, sorry, Dr. Bob, I guess so. The fact that Kellon would not like me for saying this, but the fact that we both presentation brothers students, and the fact that I taught him once is probably coming true. So, and I do like to address people by their first name, so forgive me. But Dr. Bob, let me I think attempt to answer the question. So I want to be clear. The 60 million is the retroactive aspect of the pension payment. That is not the full component of the pension. And so I just want to make that clear. I indicated in my opening remarks that we indicated to the unions that we wanted to address the retroactive aspect of the payment first, or in other words, deal with the group of persons who, in our view, were most disadvantaged because, in fact, they have not been paid their pensions, which they ought to have been paid over several years. That's the retroactive aspect of the pension. But as we all know, a pension is an ongoing something, and therefore we have to address the bill for the pensions as we go forward. I do not know. Well, first of all, I do not know whether what was bandied about was 400 million or not. But in terms of the existing data that we have, the retroactive aspect is 60 million. Now, the effect of the ruling is that there is a wider group of persons who may be eligible for retirement, and if they choose to retire, it will balloon the bill to a much larger bill. But we do not know at this point that persons who are eligible to retire will automatically retire or ask for retirement, and therefore should that happen, the actual bill will vary, because 10 people may decide, out of 100, for example, 10 people who may decide we're retiring, or the entire 100 may decide that they're retiring. So that is the future aspect of the pension that to some extent will always ebb and flow depending on the behavior of the persons who are eligible to retirement. So I do not know if when 400 million was being bandied about, it assumed a worst case scenario of everybody who's eligible to retirement automatically saying, at this very moment, I'm going to retire. That would envisage a mass exodus of persons from the public service. So in that context, the 60 million, to be clear, is the retroactive aspect of the pension payment. And that is the commitment we gave to address that part of it first.
Okay. And the final question, thank you for indulging, Leslie Ann. Thank you so much. The final question has to do with oil and gas. As we know, the previous administration gave commitments to ensuring that wells would be harvested with respect to our oil and gas natural resources. What have you discovered so far? I know it's still early on, but what have you discovered so far with respect to those commitments? Are there discrepancies with respect to those commitments? Or were those commitments just made in the heat of a political campaign back in 2008?
I would say this. We are yet to get to the bottom, and I suspect it will take some time for us to get to the bottom of this oil and gas situation. But I can assure the public that we will get to the bottom of it. The issue is too important for us to simply walk away, blah, blah. I have actually had no briefings on this particular issue, but it's an issue that I intend to pursue. I've had calls from various persons who claim to have information, both inside and outside of Grenada, on the matter. But obviously, we have to do things properly. One of the things, we still hope to achieve, as I've indicated, at the end of the governance is for all of Grenadians. Some of the former ministers have reached out to indicate that they are happy to sit down and have any transition conversations that need to take place for the smooth functioning of the government. We certainly would want to pursue that with all former ministers if they are so minded to agree. But certainly the oil and gas situation is a national situation, and so the public, in my view, should be fully aware of what has transpired. And I hope in the several weeks and months that we'll be in a position to provide the information that we find. It is, in my view, a bit of a mystery that there's been complete silence and very little information available to the public on this issue. And if we compare, for instance, Guyana with Grenada, you would see the tremendous strides that Guyana has made in the exploration and development of its oil and gas industry.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so we won't be able to take the follow-up questions, but we do still have one or two people who have not had the opportunity to ask their questions, and so we'll have to ask you to do so quickly. But first of all, I have one here from somebody on social media. They're asking, how committed is this government to see the completion of the National Population and Housing Census, which started in 2021 and it's ongoing, especially in light of the fact that some people have a little issue with confidentiality because of some of the questions that are being asked?
We're very committed. The National Census is an extremely important tool that we need to use to help plan the socio-economic development of the country. And as I met with the senior managers at the Ministry of Finance, including the head of the Statistics Department, Mr. Brizan, I gave him our commitment to ensuring that we do everything we can to ensure that the census takes place. So I actually want to make a public plea to our citizens to recognize, censuses are done on average once every 10 years. The collection of the data, I can assure you, is being kept confidential and will be kept confidential. There are sanctions for any breach of the confidentiality provisions, but the data is absolutely critical to help us as a government and to help our citizens in general be able to plan their socio-economic development. So we really want to encourage you to cooperate with the persons who are coming out of the statistical office to collect the data and to really give them the opportunity to do their work in a quick and efficient manner. We recognize that additional resources and additional personnel are going to have to be used to make sure that the census can occur in a timely manner. But now that the elections are over, there should be no confusion between political parties, canvassers, and the persons doing work on behalf of the census department. So I really do want to urge the public to cooperate with the census, the statistical department, and to ensure that the census can happen.
Thank you, sir. Nisha Paul and Mikey Hutchinson, you all will have the opportunity for the final questions. Nisha, good morning.
Pleasant good morning, Lesbian, and good morning to the Honorable Prime Minister and the other members at the head table. You guys hearing me clearly?
Yes, we are. Go right ahead.
Okay, so my question is directed to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance on the issue of making workers permanent, right? Or increasing the size of the public service. Can you speak to, has any assessment been done and where are we with that? And as a follow-up, the former finance minister had advanced the argument that the increase in the size of the public service, he called it a threat to the economic stability of the country, referring to a pact that was signed with the international community in securing the haircut deal. Have you had the opportunity to assess the situation? Can you share your thoughts on this issue? Thank you.
All right, thank you for the question. It's a very important question. We have not yet had a formal assessment of the state of the public service. In my initial briefings and meetings with senior managers of the public service, there are a number of obvious things that are clear. You have significant persons in acting positions. You have significant variances between established and non-established persons. You have significant variances between contracts for services and contract of services, when most times persons are doing exactly the same thing. And in many instances, it is a distinction without a difference. So what I've indicated to the senior managers of the public service, and in particular since I'm the minister responsible for the Department of Public Administration, is that we are going to have to devise ways in which we address and solve the challenges faced by this varying different terms and conditions of service. But I want to make it clear, it's a mirage to think that people who work for the government are not public servants. They are being paid from the same consolidated fund. They are being paid from the same sources of funding. Whether you call them contract for service, whether you call them contract of service, whether you call them public servants, whether you call them established workers or unestablished workers. So the only entity that has grown the public service is the past administration. Now, it may be finding cute ways to name people different things so that they don't fall under the public service. But that is a legacy that they have left. And it's a legacy that we need to fix. Because it is not just a question of the debt. And again, the debt is debt that they incurred. So the reality is, if you incur debt, and if you use the monies, particularly in non-productive sectors, then exactly what happened is what happened. You will then face a structural adjustment program. You will then have to increase taxes, and then the standard of living of our citizens are the ones who are going to be affected by it. So the size of the public service, or let me put it, the size of government workers, by whatever name you choose to call them, is the size. And that's the reality. And if you govern in such a way that you place the country in the hands of the IMF and the World Bank and all these multilateral institutions who then come back and say to you, you need to cut the size of your public service. Well, that has been going on since the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. That is what they do. So we've inherited this situation. We need to address it and we need to fix it. But I want to make this clear. The standard of living of our citizens are more important than meeting some commitment to the IMF. And I will quote Mia Motley, we are here to service people, we are not here to service debt. So if I have to choose between servicing our people and servicing debt, the answer is obvious. We will service our people. And putting our people in a position where they have no job security, where they are paid low wages, where they do not have any career prospects, where they have no form of social security in the form of pensions or any kind of health insurance, etc., could not be a way to develop your people or develop your country. So I think we could challenge the IMF or the World Bank to show us the poor countries and show us the wealthy countries. And the wealthy countries all have pensions. They all have all kinds of forms of social safety nets and social securities, because they too recognize that people is more important than servicing debt. I don't think anybody has more debt than the United States. And they're a wealthy country. So from that perspective, while I appreciate we are smaller and we don't have the muscle that they have, certainly as the leader of the government, my job is to fight for our people. And that means fight for servicing our people, not fighting to service debt. It doesn't mean that we will be irresponsible. It doesn't mean that we will bloat the government service. To the contrary, we want to grow the economy, and we feel strongly that the growing of the economy has to be done by the private sector. But that requires us as a government to invest in the areas where the private sector will be given the opportunity to grow, which means investing in education, investing in the digital economy, the blue economy, the creative economy, areas that will give our young people in particular the opportunity to become entrepreneurs, to become small business owners, to produce and make things. Because we accept that the government cannot absorb the hundreds of Grenadians who come out of school every year. There's a finite number to government jobs, and we need the private sector to step up. We need to encourage the private sector to step up, and we have to make sure that our policies encourage the private sector to step up. So thank you for the question.
All right, I cannot be unfair to MTV, who said they had their hand up for a while now. MTV, apologies. Good morning, are you ready?
Good morning. Yes, I am ready. Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we are. Go right ahead, please.
Wonderful. Good morning to the head table. I have two questions. One is a follow-up to Nancy Maguire's question on sustainability and security. You spoke a lot about that, but we do have a very high food import bill. I'm not really hearing on plans on how plan to address this situation. And if I can quickly, I know you said one question at a time, but it's running out of time. So my second question is to Minister Cornwall. For parents who may have already registered as students and paid fees, what plans are in place to maybe reimburse them, since starting in September, they will have no fees to pay?
All right, thank you. I will address the high food import bill question. Solving the high food import bill is not going to be a short-term fix. It is going to be a medium to long-term issue that we have to tackle, and not just here in Grenada, but regionally as well. The reality is we have to produce, there has to be an entire cultural shift. We have to actually want to become producers rather than just consumers. And that requires an entire re-education of our population, where we recognize the value of agriculture, because that's where food comes from. Where we recognize the value of fisheries, where we recognize the value of livestock, animal husbandry, etc. And that is going to take time. But it also requires a cultural shift in terms of our consumption patterns as well. The fact is, there are substitutes that are available in Grenada. And if we take starch, for example, there's probably more starch substitutes in Grenada than and in the Caribbean and probably most parts of the world. But we choose to import wheat-based products. We choose to import macaroni and pasta and flour. But there's cassava, there's sweet potato, there's ripe plantains, there's blogger, there's yams, there's eddos. You can go on and on. But we are the ones choosing to educate our children by feeding them macaroni, by feeding them pasta. So we have to be the ones to want to actually adjust our eating patterns so that we import less. That's just one obvious example. Chicken consumption is very high in Grenada, but it is mostly imported chicken. Again, we need to be able to support our chicken farmers, our poultry. We need to be able to put the policies in place to ensure that we produce more and more chicken and that we consume so locally. We can look at St. Lucia and we can look at Barbados as examples. It's not far-fetched. They are doing it. In fact, Barbados is almost self-sufficient in the consumption of, in producing the chicken that it consumes, and St. Lucia is steadily been increasing the level of domestic production and consumption of local chickens as well. So we need to do the same. But those things are going to take time. It's our job to advocate for those things. It's our job to educate the population. It's our job to put the policies in place. But ultimately, the production has to be done by the private sector. It has to be done by our farmers. It has to be done by our processors, with us providing the infrastructure for us to do so. The government itself doesn't import the bulk of the food. It's the citizens that are doing so, whether it's via supermarkets or via barrels or via when we travel. So yes, and that's why we talk about food security, because if you are importing the food, and if there's an external shock like a pandemic or a war or challenges with access to transportation, it means the food doesn't come. And I think those of us who experience the long lines to go to supermarkets during the pandemic recognize that we were lining up to go and meet empty shelves because we are importing the food. So if the container doesn't come on the boat from Miami or Mexico or Brazil or wherever it's coming from, we have no food. We have no food because we have chosen not to use the things that we have, whether it's breadfruit, whether it's cassava, sweet potatoes, etc. So it does require, in my view, a sustained educational and cultural shift, as well as our approach to culinary arts and food and nutrition and all of those things to make sure that we consume more of what we eat, but also that we don't think it's second-class food. People believe that if you eat local, somehow there's less status with eating sweet potato compared to macaroni. So those are some of the things that we have to be on and address. So I think once we start that, and things like the Food and Nutrition Council and so on, our schools would be crucial to ensuring. So it's going to be a multifaceted approach. It's not just the Ministry of Agriculture. It's not just the Ministry of Education. It's the Ministry of Health. It's our Government Information Service. It's our media to really push that overall change that we need. I think the second question was meant for Minister David Andrew. So I'll let him take the question.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. So to answer the question, in terms of schools that have already charged students and parents for the coming term, communication was already sent to schools that following a meeting with principals, eventually the repayment will take place, but I am stopping short of saying how, and because there are varying circumstances surrounding each school. And so to make a blanket statement here may just treat some schools inappropriately. But in discussion and engagement with the principals of the various schools, because of the various nuances and differences that exist in fee structure and what and how things are aggregated, we are going to continue those discussions, and it will be communicated through the Ministry of Education to schools, and by the time we have it finalized on how it would affect each school and how each school will proceed, more communication will be sent to the public. But for now, it's being discussed to make sure that through the schools, the mechanism for repayment reimbursement will be shared at some point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mikey, final question from you. Good morning.
Good morning.
No, that's thank you.
All right. Good morning to the Prime Minister, and congratulations to you and to the other ministers on your success in the election. And good morning to the Permanent Secretary, Leslie, and good morning. I am seeking some clarity on the school fees in terms of what categories will be covered under school fees, because I know that there are some schools who have several ways of charging. They have, for example, administrative fees, PE fees, and all of that. Will that be considered as part of the general fees that will not be required to be paid?
Thank you very much. Yes. Let me put it simply. For fees, what we can consider as things that would be required to be paid are things for which the students or their parents will receive something. I can put it simply. And by way, I mean a tie. If the school has a tie, you obviously have to be charged for that because it comes at a cost. The crested shirts, the PE uniforms that are sourced, those we envisage that a charge will be laid. We talk about fees, and several years ago, the ministry had given a fee structure where there was a $25 fee per term. And at the very base, we're considering that. Now, we know that there are other things that some persons, and that's why we are not very public about how we treated it, because not every school pays their own security, for instance. But there are schools that do that and depend on the fees. Not all schools do that. So there are these differences that allow us to, that make it a little more difficult to say across the board. But the standard fee, I can tell you off the bat, we're going to take care of as a ministry to make sure that no school has to pay that. No student has to pay the standard $25 fee per term. And if there's any school that has current operations that they charge students for, we will discuss to make sure that those schools are not put in a worse off position. So it is a kind of ongoing discussion that we are engaging principals with to make sure while we achieve the policy position of free access to education for all, that we don't put schools in a worse off position. So we're moving as we go, trying to ensure that both things are achieved.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. So, colleagues, we do apologize to those of you who still have follow-up questions because we've been here for almost 2 hours, and you have to understand and appreciate that the gentlemen also have their work to do. So we'll go to our final comments now, and we'll start with the Honorable Joseph Handel, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Trade and Export Development. Then we'll go to Senator the Honorable David Andrew, Minister for Education, Youth, Sports and Culture, and the final word from the Honorable Prime Minister. So, Mr. Handel, over to you.
Thank you, and I'll be very brief. At the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Export Development, but this morning I'll focus mainly on foreign affairs. We are committed to overhauling our foreign service to reflect the needs and values of our country. We are committed to ensuring that there is a career path for people within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We are committed to professionalizing the entire ministry and the way that it does business. We are going to stick to international norms and values regarding the appointment of diplomatic personnel. And as far as is possible and practicable, we are going to be looking first to our own Grenadian people here and in the diaspora to conduct business for and on behalf of our country. There may be some exceptional cases where non-nationals will have to be engaged, but in such cases, all of the necessary due diligence will be done to ensure that we minimize the risk for reputational damage to our country. Thank you.
Right, so I know there are some persons who might be wondering about the status of the book program and the tablet situation. Those programs continue, only that there'll be no charge associated with them, not even the $25 charge. So all of that, in case you're wondering, with all of the normal sign-ups and everything that formally obtained, all of those continue, the tablets and the book program, in case you're wondering. But let me just beg your patience. Now, in this transitionary period, I want to implore all stakeholders, parents, ministry officials, educators, principals, teachers. This is a work in motion. We are working towards providing free education to all our students up to tertiary level. And at any point of its implementation, you are going to have kinks, because the real effect of this cannot be analyzed before it hits the ground, in the experience of some countries that have gone there before. So we beg your patience as we work consistently and diligently with our stakeholders to ensure that there's a smooth transition to doing exactly that and ensuring that free education gets accessible and accessed by all our students across Grenada, Caricom, and PT Martinique. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable Prime Minister, the final word is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Leslie. And first, let me thank my colleagues, David and Joseph, for joining me this morning, as well as Mike from the Ministry of Finance, and to members of the media who are here in person and virtually. I don't know if cabinet briefings normally go this long, but I accept that as the new kids on the block, perhaps there's a bit more curiosity than is usually the case. We're happy to be here. We look forward to continuing the cabinet briefings. I'm sure outside of the briefings there would be several opportunities for us to continue to engage with members of the media, the fourth estate. And we also want to encourage our media practitioners, because they too are part of the education process. They too are part of the democracy process. And a vibrant and healthy fourth estate is critical for our democracy. So when we talk about education and we talk about improvement, we also recognize that journalists and the media are critical to that. So I want to assure you that you have my support as well. And we certainly recognize the need to continue to encourage our journalists to be professional, continue to encourage them to self-educate and to improve themselves and their skills. So I don't want it to be said that you are forgotten, a general trust to transform Grenada. As Minister of Information, I certainly pledge to be as transparent as we can be and to be as open as we can be. One of the legislative issues we will be looking to address is the need for a Freedom of Information Act, so that you don't feel that you have to fight with public officers to get information that the public has a right to know. So that's one of the issues we would be looking at. And obviously to continue building a healthy relationship with members of the well, I was going to say press, but that's the old time word, members of the media. It is still early days. As a government, we have a lot of work to do. We also would be addressing the opening of Parliament. So we discussions with the Clerk of Parliament to ensure that happens as well. We have to regularize, and I'm using that word, the situation with members of Parliament's offices. It seems to me what happened certainly in the last couple of years was rather irregular. And I will stop short at saying that, but certainly the opening of Parliament is one of the agenda items that we have to address as well. And so more information will be provided in due course as we come to that. OEC's Heads of Authority meeting is also scheduled, in which Grenada would be handing over as chair. So again, it's likely that our Minister of Foreign Affairs or myself will have to attend that. But there are a number of things, and I want to make this point. We campaigned on very specific things. And so we intend to ensure that our manifesto, our campaign conversations become the center and focal point of our policy positions. And so that's probably why I was a little passionate in my response to questions about biting off more than we can chew, because I didn't think the public elected us into office for us to be taking baby steps in our approach to governance. I think change oftentimes will cause disruption, but the intent is to move the country forward. The intent is to galvanize the collective energy of Grenadians, our creativity and our passion. And we think we have a unique opportunity to do so. And so it's incumbent for us to act as quickly as we can, as I said, in a responsible manner. But I think decision making, so I'm saying this, I can certainly say making decisions, if people are not used to the fact that decisions are made by government, under this government decisions will be made. And critically, we will do everything to make sure that we can implement them. So I look forward to continuing the engagements as we go forward in the several weeks and months. And thank you. Have a wonderful Monday. Thank you for spending the morning with us.
Thank you so much, Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. Thank you to the Honorable Senator, the Honorable David Andrew, Minister for Education, Youth, Sports, Culture, Mr. Joseph Handel as well, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Trade and Export Development, and Mr. Mike Sylvester, who was here, of course, playing a very supporting role, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance. And thank you to all the viewers who joined us via Channel 22 of Facebook page, YouTube channel, other media entities, the diaspora, of course, and our colleagues who joined us via Zoom and in person. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you again next week.